So back in the day, Vega was a past pole star. And in his own words, Ra paints a picture of Vega not just as a star, but as an instrument. And we can see that in terms of, well, it's a lyre, a musical instrument. It's an instrument. So we can link that. It's an instrument measuring the end of an era, our seven-centered consciousness. He says he often tells stories about his own experience, and we can see on this slide, we see the Western astrology, the chakra system, the I Ching, the Kabbalah, but there's something missing here, according to what he was told, as in the sequencing, and that's the thing that we're going to go into. So, or he went into, and that's why we're going to go and cover it too. He said one of the oddest things was the fact that there was information that I was taken through in terms of what we see in the human design Rave body graph, the mandala, the complete mandala with the body graph in the middle, where we get the incorporation of what most people would call pseudoscience. Yeah. Kabbalah, I Ching, astrology, chakra system. It's not modern day science, it's ancient observational sciences. So modern day calls it pseudosciences. And what we see is that in this configuration or the synthesis of what we're looking at, Eastern and Western astrology, not just, Western, it also because of the precession of the equinoxes, we're looking at all of these things being integrated into a synthesis. And in this synthesis, we're missing the tarot, as in one of the ancient ways of interpretation. Now, sometimes people use the I Ching as a kind of predictive way of doing things. They use sticks back in the day. Nowadays, people can use cards because we have them. But here, when it comes to shifting into one of the most mystical aspects of Ra's transmission, his revelation was that there was an ancient, and this is sourced into the Egyptians, the sequencing system of the tarot, it's actually tied to Vega. And so his sequencing is something that was introduced to him by the voice, of course, in his experience first, and then experimenting. Sequencing was explained to Ra as a kind of progressive program, or a way of describing a progressive program. So the illustration that was given to him in sequencing was that it was introduced to him as the way that we refer to the tarot as far as working with the tarot. If you don't know, anybody not worked with the tarot or played with tarot or heard about tarot, do please let me know. But it's a difficult thing to describe in our modern day languaging, to take it like solidly and realistically. Nowadays, if you go to any metaphysical bookstore, tons of them here in Sedona, you can find stacks and stacks and stacks of card decks where people have taken inspiration from perhaps the tarot or whatever systems, angel decks, all kinds of god decks, all kinds of predictive decks, crystal decks, healing decks, you name it. We've got tons of them, right? So it's loosely based on Kabbalistic thought, but the Kabbalistic thought originated in Christian mystical circles in the Middle Ages. And sequencing, according to the voice, can be linked back to ancient Egyptian times. So its real source, according to what Ra was told, the voice told him, was that the true origin of tarot belonged to the Egyptians. And that's in accordance with their sequencing system. So very similar to the Mayans, in a way that there were layers and layers and layers of sequences that operated within each other. Reminds me of fractals, as far as the alignment, how in one way or another, what we had, the cosmic fractal, as within, so without, the mystical realms of this interpretation of reality, fractal families. We still have the larger sequence that held everything together, and sequences that were a progressive evolution of our society, culture, life, as we understood it back in the day. So I remember in, maybe it was like 6th, 7th grade or something, being really fascinated with the Egyptian hieroglyphs, the pictograms, you know, the illustrations, and how it could communicate so much. Being able to interpret the unseen through this mystical sequencing. One of the reasons in human design this is not there as far as tarot is because, according to Ra, it had a breakdown in the communication field, as in it isn't accurate to the degree to which the other components or parts and pieces of human design happen to be. So there's a flaw, you could say. Back in the day, a lot of mystical or occult things were kept just that, occult as in private, secret. A lot of things were given out piecemeal, perhaps to misdirect or not be really clear deliberately. But nowadays, with the internet, we have all kinds of things, right? And you really don't know until you use your authority what to trust. It may be that that thing is trustworthy for someone else, but it doesn't happen to be for you. There's this interesting dynamic in Vedic astrology that they teach, in that there is potentially, not always, but potentially an inability for the person who's doing an analysis to really be able to speak to that being who is coming for the analysis, the reading, as they call it in Vedic astrology. And that has to do with the not just the two, but the time, the frequency. So it's one of the things that I recognized too, is that sometimes it's not up to us to be the deliverer of the message. No matter how hard we want to tell somebody something, something stops us, something blocks us. And it feels to me as if sequencing is one of those things. It's just not to be, my mind said, messed with or meddled with. It's not to be integrated into the human design system. So what Ra says is that according to what he was told, each human being in the hierarchy, because obviously our societies are structured differently, but each human being in the hierarchy was recognized in the priesthood as having a specific sequenced start. And that certain occasions, religious festivals, bonds like marriage, or these kinds of things were coordinated to the sequencing, these sequences that a human being was designed to go through. So the ways that these sequences were laid out was not mathematical. Whereas if you think about the I Ching, very much mathematical, right? Quantifiable, easy to understand, or easier anyway, than hieroglyphs or pictographs that are sourced into a very ancient civilization that we don't have a connection with in the same way. So these complex pictographs within what we understand like hieroglyphs, the way that the pictograph language operates, we're looking at sequencing in the tarot that were determined, these pictures determined for what would be the designation of each stage in someone's sequence. And ultimately, these pictographs would eventually morph and mutate into the modern tarot. So if we think about tarot, oftentimes one of the things that people want to mix with human design, tarot and the ancient hieroglyphs, just link those two in your mind so that you can see where the roots source into. And what Ra was given was a source of how the original Egyptian sequence system, where there were 3 charts that he drew in late January of 1987, that they actually included these sequences. So he was shown how different pictographs went around the wheel according to the voice. He was shown. And he was being shown this as well. Gate 54, Vega, happens to be there right now. And that 54th gate is a very unusual gate. We're going to go through the basics, but basically in the lesson, he tells the story about how when he first wrote the Rave I Ching, only his partner, now, not now wife, but his ex-wife, who's now the owner of Jovian Archive, along with her sons, she had been the only one who had seen it. He didn't really know anything about astrology or any of these things. She, speaking German, gave him a copy of Wilhelm's I Ching. And he didn't speak German, he didn't read German. He only had that copy to sit down and begin to write the entirety of the 64 hexagrams with all of their line values. And this particular gate is the one that didn't have anything to do with the ancient system of the I Ching. Now, the ancient I Ching is definitely different. It's a product of its time. But still, you can see a kind of thread of continuity, we'll call it, within the constructs, as in Ra started with a name that was the original, gave it a gate name. So we have the hexagram of, and then the gate name. And then if you look at each of the qualities, you can see line values. You can see a kind of genetic continuity or a thread within all 64. But this 54, with the exception of this 54, this 54th gate doesn't have a relational dynamic. And so when he first shared this with someone outside of his partner, that group of individuals had been studying the I Ching, and they didn't like his description of this one because it didn't relate to the original. So we're going to begin with talking about how is this designed to be really? Well, Ra was given the knowledge, right? So we know that, yes, he had his own filter or framework of understanding. But if you listen to the history, he went through a purging process and he had no idea about the I Ching, period. As in, it wasn't within his realm of study before he wrote it. He had a book, it was in German. So obviously, this is not something he came up with and thought about and tried to process and assimilate. It was a true download. What we're looking at is with gate 54, the marrying maiden, the gate of drive, interaction in its mundane social context, but also one's mystical and cosmic relationships. Okay, that's the gate 54. We see the line values. We remember we're studying Vega, and this down here, we'll look at it shortly, is where it happened to be in 1987 when Ra has his cosmic mystical experience, encounter with the voice. And thereafter, in his explorations, when he was ready to start to put the work out, do the work. In the beginning, he was still dealing with self-described insanity, or what he thought it happened to be. And what a lot of people would have agreed, including you and me, in looking at his outward appearance and experience, it seemed to be that he was absolutely insane. But when he wrote the Rave I Ching, he did it through automatic writing. If you've ever experienced automatic writing, you don't know where it's coming from. It's like, the page is moving you, is the way that I want to describe it. It's not just the pen moving without your frame of reference. It's as if you sit down to a blank piece of paper and some people will see it before it's written. Other people will hear it. I tend to hear before I write. So writing, or as in automatic writing, is writing without knowing what you're about to write until it's flowing, until it's there. So he wrote the Rave I Ching without a reference, except for that German book, where he simply stared at the hexagram chops and went line by line through each one. And the result of that is the original copy of the Rave I Ching. So nothing that you see in the Rave I Ching today, when he spoke this, 2007, is different than what he first wrote. Now, if you'll notice, I don't have them with me, but the original Rave I Ching that Ra wrote, it's different than the definitive book of human design in places. So just so you know, there is an original Rave I Ching that was not touched, and that was what Ra wrote. That was what stood, I would say, stands the test of time, but really, how long has that been? Not very long. So we're looking at it never being edited. So it was birthed completely through automatic writing, never edited except for spelling mistakes, which was natural, normal for him. Never edited. And this is one of the mystical things as far as his experience with the voice and what that brings. He says, in 1989, I left the island, went to Amsterdam through the owner of a very, very famous esoteric bookshop at the time. It was somebody he knew from Ibiza. This man introduced him to a group of people who had been studying the I Ching for literally decades. And one of these groups of people had been doing meditations on the I Ching together as a group for a quarter of a century. That's a really long time to be studying one book. And he was introduced to them, and they were the first people, again, to see, besides his partner that he lived with at the time, to see that Rave I Ching. And they asked if they could hold on to it. It was a very strange time for him when he had 2 weeks without that manuscript, back in the day when there were written or typewritten things. There's no backup or hard copy, that you could have unless you happen to go photocopy. And were there even photocopiers back in the 80s, early 90s? I don't know. Then he remembers meeting them. They obviously didn't understand anything about human design because he hadn't taught it yet, just about their own I Ching, not the Rave I Ching, except for what he gave to them. And nobody really did know anything about human design at that time, including himself, he admits. In the beginning of his process with the work, he had to, by his own experience and interpretation as he was teaching, learn too. So a lot of times it's similar as far as how those like us have this experience of us, meaning the unconscious throat channel. If any of you have an unconscious throat channel, you know what I mean. It's like you're saying things, and if you're attached to, observant of, witness consciousness, you're either observing in the moment, or what I find is I have to look back and go listen to hear what I really said and to process it thoroughly. So it's like you're speaking without knowing what's coming through or where the knowing is coming from. So it's the very beginning of his process with the work, the Rave I Ching. And what this group of individuals who had studied this stuff for a century, quarter of a century, they were analyzing the lines that he had written. And they were impressed with the fact that the lines were different, they were actually the same, as in the essential values came through them. So it was a modern interpretation of the ancient I Ching. We are now Raves, nine-centered beings, not full-blown Raves, but you know what I mean. This is a different kind of creature that we are from the seven-centered. So what happened is, in the language of these individuals who had studied, meditated on that I Ching, their language about what he had said is that he brought the I Ching into the new age, or to the modern times, not the new age as in the new age, mystical cosmic woo-woo, but just modern language. And they were impressed with that. So if we look to the fourth line, this is the one that's truly a complaint and different. And he loved that, of course, Ra being attached to, as an individual, being different. The cosmic consciousness that we are moving towards, it's our ancient past, and also what we're moving towards in 3 centuries or so. We're looking at here, the bold blue, in this most mystical of positions, there is neither an exaltation nor a detriment, for in truth, they are one and the same, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. There is no description possible of this line. Each planet will manifest this energy uniquely, with absolutely no guarantee that its effects will even be perceived. However, the potential is always there. This is the fuel for transformation at its purest level. No polarity, as in there is no binary, no specific planetary accent. It's the one place in the entirety of the Rave I Ching that has a description like this. And this was their complaint. They said that they wanted them to change this line. They wanted Ra to change this line because it had no relationship whatsoever to the original source, to the original I Ching, none. And they said that it was an inherent, obvious anomaly, and it had to be considered a flaw. That this is the 54th gate, fourth line, enlightenment and darkenment, a line that has no value or associations. Even in the writing of the line itself, no specific thing that is implied as far as value and association or planet or configuration. So this is really an incredible place that we find ourselves this week with Vega being here in the 54th gate. And he was told that we know in a wheel, there's theoretically no end, but we can begin at a certain point and return to a certain point in the wheel. And this is Vega. So nothing ever ends completely. There's always a spiraling. And here we see no end and no beginning, the Alpha and the Omega. That's why it is described that way. It's part of the last quarter of the wheel, the quarter of mutation, purpose fulfilled through transformation. Remember, if we look around the wheel, the first quarter, initiation, mind fulfillment, then civilization, then bonding, then mutation. So this is the close of a sequence, okay, the close of a sequence. Ra wants us to have a little close of his mystical story here when we start with sequencing. He said, if I remember correctly, I started with the first gate in Scorpio. He said, I didn't start. That was where my instruction began. Yeah, we have the full-blown heaven over heaven, all gang lines. And it closed with 54, a small arc basically going through what is the quarter of mutation. And this is where he was told that this is the marker of a new age right here, okay? This is the positioning for the close of the sequence. Now, the close of that sequence, again, ancient Egyptian sequence is what we're talking about here. He says that's quite something to think about. And the voice made a point of stressing that. He wanted to put it that way, that he was stressed. It was impressed upon him the importance of Vega here at the close of a sequence. So the Mayans have the same thing, again, the similarity in those two, where the sequence literally comes to an end. This was the Egyptians' prediction about the end of life. You know, the Maya, remember, they had this, end times. So it's an interesting thing to think about now that we know that the 54 is the closing of the door. It's a marker heralding the close, the end timing. And so when he was in the embrace of his mystical experience, Vega was entering that 54th gate in the first line. And he says it's a great star, the ultimate marker for our times. It is our past. It is also our future. We follow Vega, as in the way that we're spiraling. We know that our star is hurtling through space and time, and we're following Vega, that star. It's the direction that our solar system is moving in. It is in relationship to the center of the galaxy that it appears to be that Vega is where we're going. And it's in our future, and it is the end, because, spiraling through space and time. It's the close of a sequence. So it's a great light in the sky, the brightest star in the sky in Capricorn, the constellation of the Lyre. This instrument, the brightest star, the alpha star of the constellation. The alpha star is the one that's brightest within the constellation. So it's an enormous bright light that used to stand dead center in the sky because it was our pole star, and it will do so again. So we're looking at Polaris is our current northern pole star. And the northern pole star, about 14,000 years ago, we can see almost on the opposite side, Vega. So it's an interesting theme, this mystical name of Vega, being a magical star, longer than any star in the sky, accordingly to our recorded history. 14,000 years ago, when Vega was the pole star, was when consciousness was slowly beginning to awaken. When the head was raised to the sky and in dead center of the sky, there she was, Vega, this marker, slowly but surely, her movement towards gate 54, counting off what is left in the existence of this kind of human creature. So that's the mystical name, the messenger of light. We who are but fragments of light, echoes of the original light. We see the messenger of light currently in 54. So it's interesting to think about Vega from 14,000 years ago to when it really truly was the light, the bright light, the central pole star. Pole star meaning it appears that we are spinning around it. So you can track it, you can follow its movement through history. So as a marker in the deepest sense, because it moves along, it is saying no more to what it leaves behind, as in it closes the door. And that's what it means to be, here it is, at the end of the sequence in our mutation in human history. So if we correlate this to the Godheads that Ra decided, this was not given to him by the voice, but he was identifying 16 different faces of the Godheads accordingly to history, culture, and truly you could pick a different God for each of these gates. It can be something that someone spearheads at some point if they want to expand upon the knowledge. So we're looking at Vega being about the rise of seven-centered beings, really is the seven-centered success signpost. More than anything else, it's interesting when we associate Vega with this particular face of Vishnu. This is in quarter by quarter. He'll talk to you about this if you want to go learn. The Vishnu section of the mandala is a very heavy place. When you get to this place, he doesn't want us to disparage Vega by looking at it in the framework of what it meant to him. The glory of the seven-centered beings, they're really truly dead and gone. We still live with the consequences of their consciousness because of how long we were seven-centered. Think about how many people still only attune to the seven chakra system within the body. Some of the people who teach healing processes have felt the difference between high heart and heart and high heart is what they call it. So they can sense the separation, but it's still pretty much in all of the books about the human biofield, the bioelectric frequencies within the body itself. So it's not our glory, the seven-centered reality. We are something different, Homo sapien and transitus. Vega is not the star of the nine-centered being, star of the seven-centered trip. And it didn't just close the door on the seven-centered being, it closed the door on our whole process. Now, what does that mean? It's heralding a difference, closing and ending, and we'll take a look at what that truly means to Ra. When you think about Vega, back in the 38th gate, the death of the seven-centered being, that shudder that goes through the life force of the planet, shudder as in this stable form that's been around for millennia and millennia. If you think about what we know of the anthropology, the bodies that are unearthed, ancient human creatures, much stronger in the jaw, different in the form back in the day. Now we can see a weakening, can't you tell, accordingly to the challenges health-wise that humanity is currently facing. So those beings, those strong beings physically, the first ones to see Vega, a seven-centered star of the light, if there ever was one, he says. And at the end of the cycle of darkness comes, and the seven-centered is gone, leaving in its death throes through the 38th gate a misunderstood energy, 38.6. He loved that as far as the eventual crystallization that it suddenly dawns on us that we are on the other side of the door. Where's the door? Right here, 54. And the door is actually closed on us already. this is where we are. We're on the other side of a door that's closed behind us because of that shifting. So let's take our hats off to the seven-centered being, according to Ra. It conquered the planet, that type of being. Strategic, extraordinary technologies that it developed out of its mental cognition. We know that it was about the development of self-reflected consciousness, its capacity for control, manipulation, domination of its reality through its purely strategic mental capabilities. And that's an overtime, although we still have people who are attempting to reign in such a fashion, dominating through delivering on the fears and the mental anxieties in order to control and homogenize the beings that happen to be subject to that kind of mental manipulation. Not just homogenization. The word I'm looking for is hypnosis. Enthrallment that all of us are subject to, should we be paying attention to the powers that be through not just music, but the ways in which they report on the news or Facebook or whatever feeds, the stories, the movies, the propaganda, that all is being funded by these beings who are still attempting to dominate. Example, ads, commercial ads. Haven't watched them in a really long time because I don't watch TV. Haven't for way more than a decade. We're looking at people who are hypnotized. They're watching movies and they're either happy, sad, and that's one of the ways that you get somebody into a way of being able to be hypnotized is by enthralling them. And then they're bombarded. If you ever watched cartoons when you were a kid, you were bombarded by hypnotic messaging where they put in this programming. So the programming, as an example, why I became a functional medicine doctor and a holistic natural medicine doctor, not going into MD because that's medicine doctor, where they're pushing pills at you, dominating you by taking your money and keeping you hooked on something that just covers up symptoms, which is failing miserably, doing a really bad job of it, instead of getting to the root cause of what's going on in order to pay attention to the body, listen to the body, give it what it needs in order to heal or to balance whatever it's experiencing. So we're looking at the incapability, if you are plugged into the matrix, to remove yourself from that kind of hypnosis. And this here, Vishnu, the end of the era, the closing of the door, we see the 54, that is bringing us to this special time frame in 350, 60, 80 years, something like that, where we're looking at a special way of being able to mark the close of this process and bring forth a new light, a messenger of light, remember. So it gives the importance of the 54 a new value to you, I am sure, when it comes to the mutation that we are all facing in 2027. It's time for a rebirthing. It's time to shed old identities and embrace your sovereignty. And this is the thing that I hope to inspire inside of you. At the moment that Vega entered into that 54th gate, when Ra was in the middle of his experience with the voice, that this new age, the end of a time, what was the beginning supposedly, and it's not a beginning as in it's the close of what the Egyptians predicted all those years ago, this end of the sequencing era, where we have Vega being quite a star. He wants to tell you a star that really shakes things up because it brings on what's new. Remember, it's a force as far as where it happens to be. Gate 54 is the drive or the pressure to rise up, to transform. So it's bringing a huge change. Remember that when we're looking at line qualities, 1, 2, and 3, they're a personal process. 4, 5, and 6, it's a transpersonal process. So the true power, if you think about line qualities when it comes to be that we're looking at frequencies of sun, earth, the daily programming, the most powerful line, 4, because it is the line of influence. It's the line of externalization. It's the line of the opportunist. That's when truly, instead of the internal process that began when Ra went through his experience, we will see in 300 some odd years, we will see this experience, this mass explosion of light. It's bringing that huge change. The light within, so forth, shone without. We see the first star to have a car named after it, the Vega. The first star ever to be photographed, Vega. It was in 1950 that this star was photographed. This first modern stellar object shining so bright. And this was in 1872. I love old cars, aren't they beautiful? Of course, gas guzzlers wouldn't want one, but gorgeous. I just love the shapes and form, especially shininess of a new car. We see this first one to have its spectrum photographed as far as the light. The first star to have its parallax measured, and the first star to have a car named after it. The transmitter of transition. You can see here the frequency of the keynoting. We know this is transmitter up here. Down here, it's transition, it's transformation as far as part of the channel of transformation, a design of being driven. So it's the marrying maiden. It's unlike anything else when it comes to being a transition, a transmitter of transition. If we think about 54, remember, it's the pressure to every single gate inside of the root, a drive or a pressure to. So this is the gate of drive, just like gate 34 is the gate of power, despite the fact that every gate in the sacral is a power gate, power and response. Here, it's my mind wanted to say unconscious drive, might be conscious to you, depending on your design. The channel of transformation, if you strip away everything that's on top of it, and you just keep stripping away until you get down to the bare bones. Here, we are talking about the survival, okay, survival, splenic center, of our species. This is about having strong tribes. We need to have strong tribes in order to survive. And what is breaking down? Remember, we have stream of instinct on one side because we have the gates of instinct, instinctive, potential, and expression of awareness. The mirror gates on the other side, we have the stream of sensitivity, potential awareness, possible expression, 49 and 37. And what's happening currently? We have the breakdown of the tribe. Not just that the background frequency is shifting and no longer do we have a focus on communal living, but also that we have the pulling away of the 49 and the 19 into their respective centers to be associated with the center itself, within the center itself, and not connected to each other. So we have the breakdown of tribal obeyances. And gate 54 is a font of pressure, of drive, this instinct to survive. We have this format quality within the tribal circuitry, you could say, that is coming from the essence of support. 54 and 19 are mirror gates to each other. If you cut the body graph, in this case, we're going to cut it like this because it's not truly in half. The heart is off to one side. So we can see just a cutting right here. If we're to butterfly it open, all of those gates are mirrors to each other. So we know then the 19, a drive to flirt, to survive in such a way that we are part, at the end of the day, of a group of finding our place within the whole. 54 is a different story. Even though they might be mirrors to each other, they live differently, breathe differently, they be different. And the 54, what it does is it's, yes, wanting to rise up the ranks, not just for itself, but for its entirety of its family, its tribal structure, to rise and thrive, not just survive, it wants to thrive. So we're looking at both of these gates, 19 and 54, having a deep influence over the way that each of their streams operate. Why? Because this is the fuel. This is the fuel for our instinct to survive, 54. This is the fuel for our feeling, our sensitivity to be a part of something greater than just ourselves, but to be a part of a community. And this is dying, disintegrating as far as that sensitivity, that capability. Now, when I say things like that, oftentimes people who don't know any better go, oh, what about me? You know, my little channel and what's going to happen and all of these fear things. Don't worry. You have everything you need inside of you to survive and to thrive. Simply follow your authority. And I'm not saying that you're going to get out of this alive. None of us does. We all come to our appropriate end, as in all doors close, and every death is simply a doorway to a new transformation. That's what the quarter of mutation happens to bring, as in it is death, just a doorway we step through and a new beginning. Okay, so it is something that absolutely is affecting human species. But those of you who were born before this 2027 shift still have that channel. And you will continue to have that channel as we move through that time frequency. It is the beings who are born after that frequency, according to Ra, that timing, that will not have that channel as far as the channel of synthesis, a design of sensitivity. It's the end of days when it comes to sensitivity to tribal needs, obviously, or the drive for touch, for being able to be in communal bonding, like marriage. We already see that crumbling, don't we? Marriage being one of those things that absolutely makes a difference in one's life as far as what one makes at the end of the day, what one keeps. Wrong marriage, bad marriage, as in, you know, it doesn't work out. Oh boy, you have a challenge, you have a problem accordingly. You know, no matter who you marry, if it's not the right being, then, you know, things fall by the wayside as far as your wealth, your happiness, your self-assured, because it does affect your quality of your self, not just importance, but self-esteem, worth, and worthiness. When one is in a relational dynamic where one feels seen, valued, appreciated, held sacred, you know, respected, it's a very different story than when you're in the throes of a divorce proceedings, we'll say. So it's just a very different kind of frequency, and yet they share a similarity at the end of the day. This mutation that we are all being impacted by accordingly to the background frequency shift, we're looking at the 49 and 55 because it's taking place in histidine. They share the same codon. We remember that this 19th gate brings the drive for this transformation. And so we have a mirror on the other side, the 54, drive for this transformation. Here are the keynotes: mirroring, transformation. Keep that in your memory. Where is it? Transformation. Okay, in the realm of transformation, it's the closing of the door. We know the end of a cycle of experience just brings forth something new, something different. So we see this mutation that is taking place, where there's going to be an effect according to Ra, as in this is something that's going to be felt. It's going to affect the fertility of human beings. Think about all these various things that happen when we are within the safe confines of a marriage. Now it becomes, according to the female mind anyway, safer to procreate, to build a family, and no more drive for that after 2027 in the same way. As in, there are all these things that can be associated with the changing of the cycle, these steps of transformation, and we're looking at one of the heralding of a new light, a new way of being Vega within the gate 54. So it is part and parcel of the transformation that is happening, Vega within the gate 54. So we see the marrying maiden, our gate of drive. Everything about this wonderful marrying maiden is about this capability of understanding that this drive or potential capability for awareness, instinctive awareness, where is the success? How can I avoid failure? How can we rise up together and not only make more of ourselves, more money, but also, you know, it's the trickle-down effect of ensuring that everybody else gets their piece accordingly. to the hierarchy, of course, because there's no end to hierarchy. We have this potential of infertility because the marrying maiden may not ever become the matron. What if she doesn't find her man to marry into? Sorry to be accordingly with the binary of man and female, but you get what I mean. If you never get to be queen, if you never get to that place of circumstance where you are able to establish one's reign, one's rule, one's sovereignty, that means then, as the marrying maiden, your particular people never get to come up with you if you never make it to that step. Changing one's capability from the 54 into the 45 to be the sovereign. So it's something that was clear to Ra as far as the 54th gate, and it's a relationship to Vega, is that it's a closer of the fertile process of humankind, because this is the only way that he can see it within the greater context of the knowledge that he had about the nature of mutation and the way that the program operates. Now, if we think about what he just said in recognition of what he said, this is really the only way that I can see it within the greater context of the knowledge that I have about the mutation and the way in which the program operates. That was his perspective. So when it comes to studying human design, we remember that all of us have our own, and we have our own inherent sovereignty or capability of attuning to truth, our individuality. No gate has a deeper association with the moon than this 54th gate. The 54th gate, as far as remembering the marrying maiden. I always think of, when I see moon in 54, I think of Darshana because she has this moon as her natal design in the line 4, particularly. And the way that this moon reads here, do not judge the maiden, because her moon is not yet full. But in the cycle of the moon, we remember that there is also darkness, a real darkness. You could see it as an emptiness. I see it as a full of potential. You know, even though her light may not be bright, there is still some substance and capability to the dark of night. In fact, some of the darkest nights bring the richest rewards. Would you agree? Going through the pain of this reality and coming out the other side, sovereign and free, aware that you are beyond compare. When it comes to our bloodlines, everything about our ability to be able to maintain this species, everything that is rooted within the capability of the 54th gate marrying maiden, our gate of drive, we look at the strength of our immune system here. It's driving our instincts, our ability to be able to defend ourselves. Think about what it is to be tribal, violent, quite frankly, as in, you know, at the core of it, we have guts, we have capability to fight for the right and might of being able to be the strongest, survival of the fittest, you know, to be able to have the most power. It really is quite drastic, you know, the way that these beings can potentially react. I'm talking about not just 54, but tribe, the way that they react to their security being threatened. You know, this is where we get people who, anywhere from doing secret, you know, deals behind closed doors to backbiting, infighting, you know, this is where we have people sleeping their way to the top. I mean, it can get quite messy here. It's tribal after all. We see the strength of the immune system, the capability of being able to eventually lord over and dominate. How do we defend? Good offense. Best offense is a good defense, something to that effect. So we're looking at this 54 where Vega happens to be the great messenger of light. How do we contrast that might? We see it in darkness. The light can only be seen if we have the contrast of darkness accordingly to how bright it is, right? So there's always this contrast, but there is always this duality. There is a this and that. We have the binary. We have yin and yang and all things in between.